which I think is kind of fascinatingly odd. Other artists, an artist named Seth Price made an artist book actually culled from bits and pieces of the various kind of anarchist handbooks that exist with advice about how to disappear in America that have changed over time and sort of set the stage in part for Evan's piece and efforts. And I guess sort of thinking about Alaska again, I was reminded of the story of Christopher McCandless, who was pictured in the book and then the film made from it, Into the Wild, who moved to Alaska, ran away from his family, and essentially starved to death in the wilderness there. But this is the last photograph of him, which he took himself not long before he died. And I guess I'm sort of struck by how even at this great remove from society, there's still kind of an inability to resist the desire to be photographed, in a sense, to sort of put yourself in front of the camera, even as you're kind of checking out from the world. So I guess that sort of seemed like a natural way to introduce Evan's project. And with that, I turn it over to you.
All right. So as Sarah mentioned, I mean, what I was interested in doing, I started out because I was obsessed with people who fake their own death. And I had been collecting little stories of people who fake their deaths over the years, and I was trying to find out some way to do a longer story on one of these people. And I finally got Wired Magazine to agree to let me do a story, and it was centered around a guy from Arkansas who built up a lot of debt on his corporate credit card, and then he decided to fake drown himself and go start a new life. So it's sort of about how he got caught, and in the process of that, looking at all these other people who had gotten caught, and many of them are really kind of hilariously, bad at disappearing. And they always do something that in the end you say, I can't believe that they did that. I mean, there was one guy who, he lived in Indianapolis and he tried to fly a plane. He was going to jump out of the plane and it was going to crash in the Gulf of Mexico, and he was a pilot. And so he went through this whole process, he set it all up, and then he flew over Alabama. He radioed the tower just as he'd planned, said, my windshield exploded, I'm going to have to jump out of the plane. Or actually, he didn't say I'm going to have to jump out of the plane, just said, my windshield exploded, I think I'm going down. And then he parachuted out of the plane, and unfortunately for him, they scrambled fighter jets to go examine this plane, which had stopped responding, and there was no one in it. And then he also had failed to put enough gas in the plane, so the plane actually crashed, not in the Gulf of Mexico, but in Florida, on the ground, and there was no body in it. But what interested me even more than that was that then they finally caught him, and he went to trial, and one of the things, he actually didn't go to trial, he had to plead guilty because one of the pieces of evidence they had against him was they had confiscated his laptop, and on his laptop were Google searches for how to jump out of a plane at X number of feet, Google searches for all of the places he had planned to go, for moving money into different bank accounts. So he had basically left a roadmap of everything that he wanted to do on his computer without even realizing that he'd done so. So as I was collecting these stories and doing this, I sort of got together with my editor and we started thinking the real way to get at the heart of how difficult this is, because you always say, oh, why did they make that mistake, would be for me to actually try to do it. So the parameters we set up were that I would try to disappear for a month, that I wouldn't actually try to go off the grid. I wouldn't go live in a tent in a national park because for a month it'd be pretty difficult for someone to find me. Now over a longer period of time, even that you could be found, but so I would actually try to adopt an entirely new identity, and I would try to use all of the technologies that I use now, including social networking, which I do. I am a participant in, but as a new person. So I'd actually try to create a new identity and then jump into that identity and leave my old one behind. And then people could win $5,000 if they found me in person, took my picture, and said a code word, which was fluke, which was a reference to the guy from Arkansas who disappeared and took his dog with him, this dog named Fluke. He was discovered 8 months later with his dog and his wife and his kid. So those were kind of the general parameters. I would try not to break the law, just so we would avoid any legal trouble when I got back. And then, other than that, we just sort of threw it open to whatever people would try to do. Now, we had to make it a little bit easier for the general public because if an investigator was looking for you, they would have subpoenas, they could get access to your bank accounts, your email potentially. So instead, we would just release all of that. So my editor had passwords to everything, every part of my life. So frequent flyer accounts, bank accounts, credit cards, and he could reveal anything that he wanted to out of those. My phone records, who I'd called for the last month. So that's how we set it off. And then I took off from San Francisco, but actually before that, so what I had to do was I had to try to figure out what this new identity was going to be like and how could I sever it from my old identity. So I adopted a new name, which was James Gatz, James Donald Gatz. Donald is actually my middle name, which was one of the kind of mistakes I made. It didn't end up costing me, but when people try to disappear, oftentimes they carry something over from their previous life. And that's the way they end up getting caught. They use the same birth date, or they'll transpose the numbers in their birth date or in their social security number. So using my middle name was a bad idea, but I adopted a new name. Part of the reason I adopted James Gatz is that it's a name that in The Great Gatsby, it's actually The Great Gatsby's original name before he changes it to Jay Gatsby. But it had a practical purpose too, which was if somebody Googled me, if I met someone and I told them my name and they Googled me, in the digital age, there's a little bit of an issue. If you have no presence online in a certain community of people, you are suspicious. And you'll read stories about people who go on dates, and the first thing they do when they go home from the date is they Google the person. So I wanted to have a reasonable excuse for why if someone Googled me, they couldn't find anything, because all they would find would be references to The Great Gatsby. So then I tried to develop these aspects of my identity, ways of using money. So these are gift cards that you pay cash for, and they're completely anonymous. And then you can register them online under a fake name, and then I used those cards to order another card online, which actually had my name on it. And it looks kind of like a credit card. I got the patriotic flag-waving one, and it says gift card in the corner, but most places, if I went and used it, they would treat it almost like a piece of ID. I had business cards, which were references to a company that I started called Bespect. Bespect Research, which I always describe as it's like respect with a B, which also doesn't mean anything. And then I mocked up a fake ID. Whoops, we lost our. We unplugged. There we go. Well, I had a fake ID. You may have seen it. It was actually like a university ID. I called myself a visiting scholar because creating a regular driver's license or passport would get me into legal problems. So I mostly tried to sort of stay within the parameters of this low-level ID. And then I would often tell a story that I had lost my driver's license, but I had this scholar's ID, and I had this credit card, and was that enough to get me by? And at most hotels, at most places where they kind of routinely ask for a driver's license for no apparent reason, that was enough.
Do we need to do something?
Is this going to come back? Oh.
Okay.
So then I had, the company that I had was actually registered in the state of New Mexico. It's a real company. It's called Bespect LLC. It's still registered. It's not registered to my name. And then I also wanted to separate everything from my old life to my new life. So I rented an office under a fake name. And then I had all my mail under my fake name show up at that office, including this gift card I had it sent there. Because any mail that I had sent to my own address with the fake name creates a connection in a database somewhere between these two identities. So here you can see the website for my company. It had some fake projects that I had whole backstories for. I had a reason why I was sort of traveling around the country. I had a fake Twitter account, but this was me talking about my daily business as I went on this trip around the country. And at different points, I would make it public or make it private, depending on how paranoid I was that someone was following it. Sometimes I would seed it with false information if I thought people were paying attention to it. This is my Facebook page. And this was interesting because, you know, if you or I sign up for Facebook, the way it usually works is somebody says, oh, you should sign up for Facebook, and then you connect with them, and then they know some of your friends, and you connect with them, and then pretty soon you have a network of your friends. You send them some invitations, maybe your family as well. But I was, as James Gatz, I didn't have any friends. I didn't know anyone, and I didn't want to connect with anyone that I knew. So it created this dilemma of how do I manufacture friends out of nothing, and it turns out there are people on Facebook who will friend anyone. And most of them are multi-level marketing gurus and real estate people. So I would find people who had 900, 1,000, 2,000 friends, and I would send them requests. And pretty soon I built up a pretty good collection of friends. A lot of these are from after, but you know, I had 30, 40 friends, none of whom I actually knew, none of whom knew me. But if someone looked me up, and oftentimes I would say, oh, look me up on Facebook. And it created this perception that I was a real person. Like, you know, who would concoct this entire identity with business cards? And it just gave an authenticity. So it was kind of looking at both sides of this question, that people could use my old information to track me, but I could also use the whole idea of digital identity to develop this new person who would have a backstory because he existed online. So then, I'll just go through this quickly because it gets a little technical, but basically one big problem I had is I was staying online. I had to show that I was online, so I would log into my email every day, my real email. And if any of you use Gmail, you may or may not have ever noticed, but in a tiny, tiny font at the bottom of the screen, it says last logged in from, and it has your IP address. And actually, if you click further, it has your last 5 IP addresses. It's basically recording every computer that you've logged in from. And your computer has an IP address when it attaches to the internet, and that IP address correlates to your physical location. And I'll talk about it in a little minute, but you can use the IP address to locate not just someone where someone is generally, but their specific address. So I had to do something to conceal my IP address to show that I wasn't where I was in terms of the IP address. So I used something called Tor, which is a piece of software that it's designed for whistleblowers and dissidents to use, so they can mask, you know, where information is coming from. It's been in the news a lot lately. If you follow the news about WikiLeaks, this website, they have a lot of interaction with Tor. So basically, Tor masks how you access the internet. So if I'm Alice, I'm trying to get something off of Bob's web server. Tor makes it look like I'm jumping from that last computer to Bob's server. And basically, all of these hops in between are anonymous. So if Bob is there and he's saying, oh, who's accessing my server, it might look like it was coming from Germany, when in fact I was in Los Angeles. But then I had a friend who worked at Google who said, you know what, Tor can be cracked. Anything can be cracked. So that's not safe enough. So instead what I did was I took these 2 computers and I left them in an anonymous office that I rented in Las Vegas, which is this windowless room. And I set the computers up, I attached them to the internet. I rented the office for the entire month. And then what I did when I wanted to access the internet was I actually remotely logged into these computers. I used these computers to access the internet. And then if someone ever traced my IP back, they would only get as far as Las Vegas. And in fact, later on they did. So I set off around the country. I started in San Francisco. I drove to Vegas. I set up my computers. Then I sold my car. I started taking other forms of transportation. I went to LA, and then I got online and hitched a ride with a band, a small indie band who was touring across the country. So I went from LA, and they kind of cruised across Texas, and I was sort of just riding along in their van, you know, helping them pay for gas, and basically they kind of left me alone. And then I ended up, this map is actually made by someone who was chasing me. It's not entirely accurate, but essentially I went to St. Louis with the band. I took a train down to New Orleans, and then I rented an office in New Orleans, and I rented it under a fake name. I signed a lease. And I would do things like I had anonymous PayPal accounts, or not anonymous, but attached to my fake name. And I would contact the landlord over the internet and ask them if they took PayPal. So sometimes I rent an apartment for a week, and I never even saw the landlord. He just left me a key in a box. I paid him with PayPal. As far as he knew, I was James Gatz, and you know, as long as I paid the bill, he didn't care.